Recording. Hi, everyone. This is the final shared broadcast for Lizzie and Karen. And we have our three questions ready for you. And Lizzie's going to start us off.
Okay. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I'm recovering from a cold and I'm going to try not to cough through this entire thing. So these were a different set of questions, as you know. And so the first question was, how has your understanding of adult education changed since the beginning of this quarter? Basically, I'm going to start with a short story and then my thing. So I attended a professional conference a couple of years ago that offered a breakdown of the history of higher education institutions and the changing role that staff has played over the centuries. And they gave this history to sort of help the staff understand their greater importance now. And they referred to us instead as student personnel administrators because our impact on student learning and experience is a lot greater than just being a secretary. But when I returned to my office, I realized they were still practicing the old school hierarchy, and that idea wasn't viable given the changes being played out in the institutions across the country and actually the world. So when I described this to my administrators at the time, in an effort to sort of help them with staff morale, they basically said, "Thank you for your time and input. Now let us do our scholarly work." That was their response. And now, 5 years later, my school is struggling with this rapid change and huge transition that my veteran faculty don't know how to adjust to because it's challenging all of those paradigms of institutional higher ed, So as far as my understanding of adult education, from the beginning of this quarter, I really appreciated how this course brought an emphasis to the importance and need for adult education to continuously evolve, technologically, programmatically, changing the formats, changing approaches to how you teach to meet both the needs of the individual people, the students, and the way it impacts society. So that was one thing that I got a better understanding of from this throughout this quarter as we did this class. If you could fix one thing that would improve adult education, would it be, and how would you fix it? That was a hard question. It really was. So I said, I wish organizations would have a greater appreciation and see the value of adult education for both the growth of individual employees and their organizations. And I would like to find a way to help emphasize that importance in some way. Also to help find more funding and resources in order to encourage it, because that's usually the first stop is like, oh, well, we don't have the money for that. And so they don't understand that if they boost up their employees, it helps the overall. And the other thing is that I personally like being a resource to others. And that's something that I get a joy out of professionally and personally. And so I'd like to be a better resource to help faculty understand the constraints their students face and to help potential students get past those constraints. And I think it's because I have a little bit of a counseling background. Mm-hmm. So it's like I understand that some of this is about resiliency on the individual's part, but basically to help make adult education more accessible to people and make it more available. Three things that I learned this quarter. This is also a little bit random. So I found the primary constraints interesting. The brief chapter that we had about institutional, dispositional, and situational. I know that these are all things that we sort of already know or inherently know, but it's when you see them as those basic three core categories, it kind of helps figure out ways to tackle those constraints or give you ideas on how to address them. I enjoyed learning about when we did our organizational background paper. I enjoyed learning about UNESCO because that's an organization I had only heard the acronym of for years and had no idea who they were or what their mission was. Yeah. So to me, that was, oh, wow, this is pretty cool, so I enjoyed that. And the third thing is, I'm looking forward to learning about e-tech and learning analytics. And it's basically, I really enjoy hearing the classmates' perspectives on all of our readings and studies, each of these videos, discussions, and things. Because to me, the subject of adult ed is so broad. Their perspectives and all of your student abilities to bring everything down to your individual, more attainable levels helped me understand things a lot more. Help them bring them down more to where I am instead of worldly, which is way too big. So that was my basic thing. And then I did have a quote from the chapter that we just read on page 386. In adult education, motivation is the starting point for understanding the context of the individual learner and to encourage persistence. And so that is something for me, again, learning about those constraints and stuff and learning what motivates people to continue their education and finding ways to encourage that persistence, to build that persistence, to get them past anything that might prevent them from furthering their education. So that's it for me.
Yay.
Yay.
Well, hopefully everyone will deliver on their online research symposiums. AKA me. No. All right. Well, I will. I think it's great that you have. Well, while you're talking, I feel like our two different approaches to these questions just kind of verifies the fact that this field is so different.
It's huge.
Yeah, and I think that that's what I was thinking about when you were talking. Like, wow, like I even picked a motivation quote too, but like I completely thought about it different, and I think that is just a big theme of what I learned, which is going to be one of the things to talk about. So I will just kind of run through my 3 questions. How has your understanding of adult education changed since the beginning of the quarter? My understanding of adult ed has changed this quarter in a few ways. The first is understanding that despite my experience, it will be different to teach adults than secondary level students. I kind of came to that conclusion last week. But it kind of hit home when I was reading chapter 12, and on page 386, it says something like, in children's education, we speak about the need to raise the motivation to learn, but in adult ed, in many cases, motivation is the key to walking in the door. And that quote really hit me hard because I think that adults deal with a lot more. I can't say all adults, but, as an adult learner, I think that there are things that you do balance, like families and jobs and, multiple jobs in some cases, and just other, I guess, outdoor stressors that you might not necessarily have as a youth learner. And so finding that motivation and even getting the self-confidence to pursue higher education could be.
It takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage. So I think it also says a lot of the difference of why, the difference of why you go back to school between children and learners. Youth learners are somewhat required to go to school, so part of the job as an educator is to motivate them to learn, whereas adult learners must do extra steps to get themselves to seek out continuing or higher education. And that means that as professors or educators in the adult realm, you are doing more counseling. You are trying to mold programs that kind of fit their needs rather than just general ed requirements, stepping stones to get to the bigger picture. So then the second thing that how my understanding has changed, which I'm still working on, is my philosophy, the whole philosophy week. And joining that to the Aims of Adult Education paper. Just the whole process got me reflecting on my philosophy around education and how that might differ from the students I teach, and how that might, like, if those two things don't align, how that could cause rifts in my teaching versus their learning. So kind of being cognizant of that as a teacher is something, I mean, not that I'd never thought of before, but it just kind of was like, oh, well, that's a different way of looking at it. So if I could fix one thing that would improve adult education, what would it be and how would I fix it? And I did also say, this is a pretty loaded question. If I could
change the world.
If I could change the world, yeah. I feel like if I could fix adult education, then I would be a millionaire. I don't know if it necessarily needs like a complete rehaul, but I think I want to help. What I want to do, and what I guess my big picture idea is, I want to help adult learners take more ownership of their progress towards learning, meaning that I want to take the feedback. I want them to be able to provide their own feedback and confidence in their work. Ideally, I would like a way for adult learners to be able to critically reflect, or have a process that helps adults learn how to critically reflect on their knowledge that they've gained, and have them be able to verbalize or justify their knowledge through applications or experiences, or even conversations with their professors. I don't know that, I mean, that doesn't really necessarily fit the whole, like, you get an A and you get a B and you get a, it doesn't fit that whole mold. But I think that there's something to be said about if we could get learners to be able to actually actually know what they learned and realize that. I think that would be hugely powerful. However, it's a big task. So, it's just kind of something that I've going on in my head. So, I think what that would do is it would take out some of a question game of students oftentimes students don't know where they stand in terms of knowing something, and until they get feedback. So I don't know if there's I don't think that there's a way to get rid of professors, but I do think that there are ways to coach, I guess, acting as more of a coach. The teacher acts as more of a coach rather than a teacher, to help students kind of come to the realization of what they've learned. So that's what I would do. What are the 3 things that I learned this quarter? Well, I'll be quite honest. I've learned a lot, but it really took me it took me a long time to realize that this was like a history course. And when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, duh, like foundations, it's a history. I don't know. It felt like it was a huge ditz moment, but that's okay. So the 3 things that I learned is adult learners seek higher education for several reasons. And those reasons might be linked to their learner philosophy. So learning about those reasons, like human capital or social justice, and how adult education could be, how people come to adult education for those different reasons, also kind of bends their path in how they learn. I also learned that my philosophy, I think this goes back to one of our shared broadcasts like a while ago, but I was a little bit stunned that my philosophy on teaching and my philosophy on learning are different. I prefer a more humanistic setting, but I definitely don't teach that way in my own class. And I need to think about and reflect on how to maybe nurture that a little bit more in my own practice, especially if it's something that I like. So that's something I need to kind of keep, digging through. And then the last thing kind of goes along with what you said about the vastness of the field. But knowing the foundations and history of adult education gave me a bigger picture idea of where the field started. And therefore, and since it is so vast, it just welcomes all walks of life. However, its lack of definition can hurt the field and that it has less of a direction of where it's going. And I don't know if I necessarily, like, I never was uncomfortable with the fact that it wasn't defined. I think a lot of people were grappling with that, but I don't, like, I just didn't get really caught up in that. I thought that it was okay, that it just has all of these little avenues that people can get access to it. So it was just nice to learn that it always was kind of chaotic in how it was defined, you know?
Yeah.
Like it was never a singular setting and a singular way to teach and a way to learn. But that it's just kind of grown over.
They're like an overarching umbrella with all these little subcategories underneath.
We made that concept map in another class, and I feel like that really kind of reinforced the fact that it's such a big, vast field where, you know, you have all these connecting parts that do kind of make this web of existence. So yeah, but that's it. It's crazy. It's been nice discussing this with you, Lizzie.
Yeah, it's been nice discussing it with you too.
Yeah. Well, I think with that, we'll keep this one nice and short, hopefully. And thanks for tuning in. Have a wonderful quarter, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.